Hey Matt,
Hey Ash, good to be back, man.
yeah, great to be back in a nice cold Franschhoek today. I
Yeah,
saw looks like snow clouds as we were coming in.
really.
I
The
think
weather's
you're
coming again. Well, we've had a few blue sky days, which is making us all happy here. But it's good to be back, man. We said it could be a one-off, and we've decided, come what may, we enjoy our conversations. So if it's just to record them for our sake, we're going to carry on doing that because, like, then we can remember what we got all excited about.
absolutely, and later we can even train an AI on it.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so
What do you want to talk about?
so I was thinking about something that's been on my mind lately is the whole concept of, so you and I both have our lives filled with goals and we've always lived according to goals and what am I trying to achieve? And one of the things that I've noticed is in my own life and looking at people around me, sometimes when people achieve a certain goal, they seem to have a tremendous sense of accomplishment and fulfillment and get a lot of meaning out of it. Other times they achieve a goal that might even look like a much bigger, more significant goal, and yet they seem totally deflated afterwards, as if the goal kind of lost the meaning the moment it was reached. So I really started thinking about this, and I love first principles and sort of always going back to the basic theory of things. And I was thinking about this concept of the first principle of the drill bit, where you go like somebody goes to a hardware store to buy a drill bit, but nobody wants a drill bit. You want a hole in the wall, but actually you don't want a hole in the wall either. You want to put a screw in the wall so that you can hang your picture. And then I was thinking, actually you don't want to hang your picture either. You want to look at the picture. And then I thought, well, actually you don't even just want to look at the picture. What you want is that experience that you get from looking at a picture or walking into a room that's well set up. You know how space can give you a certain experience. And I thought about it and I thought, well, what is experience? It's a mixture, it's a cocktail of feelings. And so I stumbled onto this idea that I think everything we do because of the way that we think it'll make us feel. The problem is we grew up in a society where as white males, specifically, I can't speak for others, but this is how I grew up, where we were taught that emotions are almost irrelevant or invalid. So your job was to figure out what needed to be done, get it done, and whether you felt like it or didn't feel like it, and how it made you feel, it didn't make you feel. Those are not things we were taught to get connected to. Now, if my theory is right, and that everything we actually do because of the way that it makes us feel, but we've been brought up to kind of ignore our feelings. I kind of have this picture. I don't know if you ever played the game Battleship.
Yes.
We've got these two bourds,
Yeah,
right?
you're trying to bomb
yeah,
the
and
other
I go
guys.
like C6, and if your battleship is in C6, I hit it, and if your battleship isn't, then I miss it. And it's almost like our goals are like that. We set a goal, and when we hit it, then we recognize whether it created the feeling that we wanted or not. But because we're not deliberate about it, because we're not aware of our own feelings, it's not only about how it makes me feel, but being deliberate and conscious about how do I want to feel. And as I was thinking through this, I asked myself the question, well, Ashton, how do you want to feel most of the time? And I realized I don't even have a proper answer to that. It's been so irrelevant in my life. It's been something to which I've paid so little attention that I don't have an answer to, like, how do you want to feel? And so I thought we could explore that a little bit.
So you got my mind buzzing on lots of things. I want to push back on a couple of things too, because so we want to get onto this feeling thing versus just a goal. I think that's a really, really important conversation, especially for we want to talk to as many people as possible, but we're 50 something, let's be honest, let's put it on the table. And it's a very interesting time of your life where you do start to question your goals, where you are you feeling any better than when you were 20? You should be, because you've achieved things,
Yeah, and you've got more wisdom, supposedly.
You use the word experience. I find that a very, very important word, because I've really been on a journey of, and often when I'm on this journey, which I've spoken to you a bit about, and maybe we'll cover in some of the podcasts, of this idea that actually reality is where heaven and earth meet. So it's something to do with the principle and the idea, and therefore the feeling and the physical is actually the point of true reality. And the word I often come to try and relate that to somebody is the word experience, because I don't think it just gets abstracted to feeling. I think because feeling is just, well, maybe emotions is getting there close, but anything that we can reduce just to thoughts or principles is, in that terminology, heaven. And then earth is the fact that we are rooted in this earth, and we engage it through our five senses.
Yeah.
And I find that it's when those come together. So in other words, when there's profound experience of your senses together with the right feelings or the right thoughts, that we experience the greatest moments of our life. And so I think that the answer is the word experience, and I don't think it's just working out a feeling. So that's the one thing that I think it's a little bit more complicated,
good.
but I think it's really good that is one of the first principles of understanding what feelings or to what extent are our goals linked to feelings.
Yeah.
So I'd like to maybe explore that a bit more, and maybe let's just start a little bit on that, maybe to tease out a bit on that. So, just one very clear thing that you and I know from strategic planning is, when you do strategic planning, I've always said, the starting point is you say to people, what's your vision statement?
Yeah.
And a vision statement really is typically a long-term goal. It's like in 5 years' time, and I always teach people that a vision statement of a business needs to be actually very, very real. It needs to be something like in 5 years' time, the company's going to have this many people, it's going to be like this. And we used to have this concept of reality vision.
Yeah.
This is something that eventually one day you're there.
Yeah.
We wanted to be the biggest Microsoft solution provider in Africa, tick. We wanted to have a 5 billion turnover, tick. We wanted to employ 4,000 people, tick. We've arrived. The goal is achieved. And then to your point, and how many people can relate to this, especially from a business perspective, you then have this party to celebrate that you've achieved this vision, and you drink champagne and you're so happy, feelings. Then you wake up in the morning and you think, now what? And that was the day I began to discover, well, that's actually why this more fluffy thing called a mission statement is often in strategic planning. We say, well, you've got a vision, but then there's a mission that almost gives birth to eternal visions, because it is trying to deal with need. You see, that's the difference I often try and explain to somebody, the difference between a vision and a mission. A mission is trying to fulfill some need that along the way there are going to be key deliverables to that, key visions that are moving
along the way,
towards
yes.
that. So what do you think about that? So the idea is, it is manifested in a feeling, but it's a need. It's some need that you have that actually is going to be exhibited through a feeling that actually brings you the kind of fulfillment and happiness.
And so back to that, as you say, the need that's exhibited through a feeling. And I think so let's go through that. Tick, 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 tick. Yeah. Big party, big celebration.
Because I've been there.
In that party, yes, exactly, right? So in that party, in that celebration, in that moment, you have a whole lot of experience. I really like the way that you use experience, because I think that is really where your physical senses. So back to the picture. Yeah. What is the picture? It's something I see. Exactly. But when I see it, as something inside of me happens.
It's the two coming together.
Yes. And what I like about experience is, when I was thinking about this, another example I wanted to use was taste.
Yes.
And then I couldn't quite make it work. I was like, how is taste a feeling?
Good glass of wine or
a good glass of wine, a good cup of coffee. Apart from what it does in terms of, but that's part of the experience, right?
Absolutely.
So and having a complex taste. I don't know if you remember, I think one of the first times I ever visited you here in Franschhoek, we went to this restaurant that brought out these little bits of food, and every time,
give him a plug.
every time the guy comes and he explains the food to us and everything, and I mean, I'm not a big food connoisseur, but it was just an amazing experience. Yeah. I walked out of there and I thought that was very expensive, but it was worth every cent because of the experience that was added. So that need that's expressed through a feeling, I think that's where we often have the disconnect.
Yes.
We know the need.
Yes.
But what we don't know is that need should be linked to some other feeling. So when we get to that moment of the experience, if it so happened that, so let's take the BCX story.
But I want to press back on, first of all. You said we know the need. I object. We don't know the need. We think we know the need. Because,
that's good,
because we have whims.
Yeah.
We have whims. You see, this is a problem with just feelings. You are right in saying that as a 50-something-year-old white male, we weren't told to think too much about our feelings. But I actually think the next generation, I don't know what we're on at the moment, why or whatever, that they've been taught just to think about their feelings. And if something doesn't feel good in the moment, then don't do it.
Yeah.
And we've led to this generation that we could talk about, and they could press back at me, that doesn't actually want to sacrifice, doesn't ever want to do something that doesn't feel good in the moment. And that's not a solution either, because it's not going to deal with the true needs that they have.
Yes.
So our feelings have also got to be understood where it's, what do I feel like today? Is that the same feeling that I'm going to feel like Ashton in a year's time, or Ashton in 5 years' time, or Ashton? So you need to take a long-term view. So I believe we don't understand what those needs are. And maybe I just want to give you one spiritual example, because often we think the need, which is a want, is I have some internal need, for example, financial security, or I have a need for something that's linked maybe to some possession, right? Because that can be a need, and therefore the feeling is actually having that possession near me or under my control, all right? And the interesting thing is, when God speaks to Abraham, and he makes such an amazing point about like what your need is, and therefore what the kind of feelings are that are going to bring you happiness. He promises Abraham all sorts of amazing vision. He says to him, one day you're going to be the father of many nations. You're going to have this incredible whole land of Canaan, and it's even bigger that he promises him. And you're going to have seed as the dust of the earth and as the stars in heaven. And it's an incredible promise. And you think, well, what a goal. And then he comes back to Abraham and says, but let me tell you this, I am your exceeding great reward. I am. In other words, not any of those things is ultimately going to be the reward.
Yeah.
That's not actually what you need. What you need is me. Now, to me, that's a really interesting thing, because I think it's pointing at the greatest need has something to do with relationship. Absolutely. And with the fact that there is a need for two things to become one. And that's the only reason I wanted to push back, because we have a whole bunch of other feelings that may not serve that need.
So I think like that line of thinking is exactly the direction that we should begin to explore within ourselves, to say, so you mentioned, for example, an asset.
Yeah.
So let's say I say, well, I've got a goal to get financially secure for my retirement, for example.
Surely that's the feeling most of us want.
So what is it? What I want to feel secure and in control of my finances, for example. Exactly. Like that's
got to
feeling.
I'm telling you, I'm a male. That's one that I like to experience.
And then and if we take another asset, I want a nice car. Well, what do you actually want? You don't want the nice car. You want the feeling of sitting inside, smelling the leather, and again the senses and the experience coming together. Being aware of that, and then back to the story of all the boxes that you ticked. I think if you understood, like you were saying regarding the mission, if you understood how these boxes are ticking my deeper need to feel significant and make a significant impact on the story of Africa.
Yes.
Then that made an amazing, and as you say, it's a vision along the way. And so it's that idea of beginning to, with every goal that we set, so where we are at, we probably can't start by going, well, how do you want to feel? Because we just haven't practiced that in our lives. We haven't mastered understanding our own feelings. But what we could do is say, if this is my goal, how do I think this goal will make me feel? And I can immediately imagine what that will feel like. And then I can ask myself, is that really how I want to feel? And then am I taking, because I can take the different actions to achieve the same goal.
Yes.
If I understand how I want to feel, some actions might be much better at getting me along. And I think just like goals, like a mission, vision, and then goals along the way, there's actually, let's say, picture hanging. Let's say I hate DIY work. I hate drilling holes. I hate all of that. I can acknowledge that I'm going to have unpleasant feelings towards the one that I want to have. By acknowledging that, I can have feelings like persistence and courage and whatever the other feelings I use to cope with the difficult feelings along the way. I think because we haven't connected all of these things we don't typically think of it this way. What happens is if the picture hanging journey becomes really long, we get burnout, we get depressed, we feel like a failure. So we don't recognize what's happening inside of us because we're unaware of what's happening under the water.
Because also maybe we become so focused on one a set of feelings that we think is serving the true need. You see, I want to come back to your first principle. I think it's such a great example that you spoke about hanging up that picture. It's a great little analogy because it's like this hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, probably,
it's actually quite good.
Inverted in a way.
Yeah.
But you got to get back to like, is that still? Have I got to the end one? And I want to pick this financial security one up because I have seen many colleagues and sometimes even close friends who have got into their 50s and had families, married, etc., and managed to get financial security, sold a business, made a lot of money, and within a few years their relationships start tumbling, the marriage goes wrong, and therefore there's issues with their children, etc., etc. Now, if you go to them and say, well, you got the financial security, what did you want that financial security for? Why was that a need you had?
Yeah.
Okay, so therefore there's a need above that need.
Yeah.
And this is, for me, like I think the need above that need, the way I'd like to describe it, to try and use an analogy as well, is the best I can describe it is that we are pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And we want to complete our part. We're trying to find, even when you talk about significance, we're trying to find how we can be put into the jigsaw puzzle of all humanity and all creation and all existence.
Yes.
And that's what we're trying to do.
Because we want to feel that our lives are significant and meaningful.
They fit into the whole.
And a significant, meaningful life.
That's just not a random
we
thing.
Made relationally. We made in God's image. What's the first thing God did when He created this world? He created relation. He says, "Let us make man in our image."
Exactly.
So there's this relational God who creates us relationally. And then says,
with need to be connected.
Yes.
So what happens is immediately He looks at Adam and says, he's not complete. He's not complete. There is no help meet for him. Yeah. So I'm going to actually take. I mean, it's an analogy of a jigsaw puzzle. There's a piece literally out of you. You've got to go and fit together. So coming back to the financial independence, really, if you understood the need, the reason you wanted that financial independence, so that you could care for your partner and for the result of that partnership, which are your children, in a way that is responsible and gives them a wonderful, loving. That's what you wanted. Yes. So if you ended up getting the need and didn't understand that higher need, and on the way to just trying to get that financial independence, you didn't show any investment into that relationship, which often is the sacrifices we make. We're not there for our kids, we're not there for our wife because we're chasing the business and we've got to sell the business. And then eventually we get it and it's in our lap and we wake up the next morning and we don't have a relationship with our partner. We don't have that I am your reward. Yeah. And why I think that's significant is because a lot of that reward, you have to actually be intentional to understand. It's not as obvious and it can actually, it doesn't mean the other one isn't there, subservient to it, but it also can make you very aware of how to get to the other one.
Yeah. The hierarchy idea, I think, is really important. I think you sort of glossed over that. Yeah. But, Maslow, and I know Maslow's hierarchy is not perfect and there's a lot of criticism against it, et cetera, but that concept of a hierarchy of values, a hierarchy of needs, a hierarchy which says this over that.
Yes.
This is, and this feeds into that. Yes. This for that reason, because one of the things I've come to realize in life is you can do two things, exactly the same thing. The reason for which you did it can change whether it's meaningful or not.
Absolutely.
And one of the best examples is the one of the old story of two guys busy building a wall, and somebody comes along and they go, "What are you doing?" And the one guy goes, "I'm building a wall." And they ask the other guy, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm building a cathedral to the glory of God." Yeah. And they're doing exactly the same job in exactly the same building site, but their experience is entirely different.
And Ash, on that, I mean, I know for years I used to always sort of almost criticize Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as you say, many people have, and not that it wasn't a great way of the framework, but I would use the example of saying, you've got these guys in the Western world and they're pontificating and people are, getting on drugs. I said, but the thing is, you go down the need. In other words, the most important needs are the ones at the bottom. If you can't deal with your food and drink, and you can't deal with your keeping warm and your clothes, then the rest sort of unwinds. And there's a sense of truth to that. So I was saying, like in Africa, we're still trying to feed people. We haven't got time to self-actualize. And there's a truth to that, because I think there's way less mental illness, for example, in Africa where there's poverty than there is in the Western world. But But where I think I've been wrong on that is I think what Maslow is correct about is at the top, he calls self-actualization, which I would say is a spiritual need. That need is actually the first principle. It is the most important. And actually, people have, do, and will give up the lowest need to serve that highest one if they understand it. If they don't, they'll just become subject to their whims. And this is the point I was making, because what are our whims? Oh, I think my need is to have a full tummy. So what I'm going to do is I see a McDonald's or a Burger King, and I'm just going to go and like eat a burger and feel good about it. And maybe in the moment I will. But then I'm not going to feel so good when my digestive system's not working. And I'm going to feel even worse in a month's time when I put another kilogram on. And I'm going to feel even worse in 3 months' time when I go and do my discovery check and they say my cholesterol's gone up and I'm actually looking like I'm a heart risk.
Yeah.
Now, you see what's going on there. Suddenly, I couldn't just measure myself by that feeling. So I wonder also, just coming back to your original topic, whether if we were more intentional about understanding our needs, we would actually, I don't know whether this is possible, that we would, is it possible that we can actually, maybe it's what you were trying to explore. It's like, can we align the feelings for the right need? Is that,
I think,
just spontaneous
I think we have a need for certain feelings.
Yeah.
And what we need to explore is what is the sense, the experience that over the short, medium, long term is going to get me to a place where I look back at my life and I go, this moment is a great. So let's take, for example, let's say you get to 75 and you're having a big birthday party and you're looking back over your life and you say to yourself, was all of this worth it?
Yes.
What is the experience you want to experience on your 75th birthday party?
Yeah.
I want to feel healthy. I want to feel alive. I want to feel that I've significantly contributed to the puzzle pieces are together. I'd love for my children and my wife to be there and for my grandchildren by that time. I would love, I must quickly throw this in. This is sort of off-center, but I just laughed at somebody the other day, a guy called John Marcoma. He's an amazing teacher. And he said he used to have a goal that his children shouldn't need therapy and shouldn't go into life broken. Now his goal is just that they shouldn't need therapy for too long. But I think as parents, that's often one of the biggest challenges we have. Yeah. But I think, back to that hierarchy of needs and the connection of those needs to what we feel.
Yes.
So it comes back to, I think we are very bad at connecting those two things.
Yeah.
So the moment we talk about need, we translate it to physical, financial, business, society, etc., etc. What we don't relate it to is what is it that I'm trying to experience as a human being in this process? Why is it actually meaningful to me? And I think
I think so again, coming back to the spiritual first principles. So if I said to you that I think the spiritual first principle of need is connection, we could debate that.
And that is a feeling. There's an important.
Can I tell you what the feeling is? Let's leave that as a need, okay? Because as you say, you could translate. I think that the feeling, and this is a big word because then you can break this up, that the Bible says there's a feeling of that need is called love.
Love.
It's called love.
Yeah.
Because, this is the most real, and again, why I find all these things really interesting is that we can, anybody listening to this can go and Google it, we can chat GPT this, but, you see over and over again, whether you are having interviews of people on their deathbed, whether you're hearing the story of the most successful actor, pop star, wada, they always say, at the end of the day, what would you have wanted to do more? What experiences and feelings would you have wanted
more time with my loved ones?
More time with my loved ones. More time with my family. There's nothing more important than the children. I've got nothing. So, we don't need, this isn't like too much exploration at first principle level. Now, I think where you are starting to get, where it gets a little bit more murky is that obviously, but I do think it's important for people to be intentional about understanding this. That's why I'm emphasizing this. I understand that connection, becoming that love, then in your life as Ashton and my life as Matthew, there are layers that we have to go down below that actually make it more pragmatic and where we like to get to. So I'm not saying that isn't something that one has to then say, well, okay, now that we understand this, everything's hunky-dory. But I do think if you don't establish that up front,
yes,
then you're immediately working in the wrong space in this kind of middle layer. So you've got to understand this, like, what is love? Like, what does it mean? Okay, so love is the feeling of connection. Okay, how does that feel? To your point, how does it feel when I'm feeling in a love moment? Well, all I can first of all say, it's not trite. So whatever this is, if there's somebody listening to this rolling their eyes and saying, "Oh, this word love, yes, it's a word that's used on Valentine's Day and it's abused, etc., etc." But like, I think we had this discussion. I don't know if it was on the last podcast, but I always say to people, when I'm trying to prove that the things that are non-material are more real than the things that are material. Like I say, if you get anybody at the end of their life and you say, "What has been the most real thing that's impacted your life?" They'll talk something about relationship. It'll be something to do with, and so to then think you can reduce the world bunch and why I say that is we have no measurement of this thing.
Yeah.
We have millimeters for length, we have centigrade for temperature, we have milliliters for quantity of liquid. But I can't come and say, on the love spectrum, how did you go yesterday? No, it was a 72. Tomorrow's forecasted to be 84. We don't have a measure for the most real feeling that determines the fact that we are alive.
Yeah. And then on that, like, people often say, "Oh, love is more than a feeling." I go, "Yes, it is." Yeah. Yeah. And that's the hierarchy.
Exactly.
It is more than a feeling, but it definitely is not excluding the feeling.
Exactly. It's not just some rational thing. Yeah. And it comes back to, because love is in that space of experience. It's in that space that we were talking about earlier, which is the sort of nexus of feeling, rationality, and physical reality. It's those. Yeah. It's all that coming together.
And now I want to quickly sort of move back to something you said earlier, and then connect it back to this. You mentioned you sort of get to a certain point and you say, well, why did I do all of this for my children, for my, that they can be secure, etc., etc. A good friend of mine, Jasper Klute, he's the chairman of the International Christian Chamber of Commerce in South Africa. And he's got an organization called GIG, Generational Inheritance Group. They've got a bank, they've got an investment group, etc., etc. But what they've discovered is that when people think in 3 or more generations, their approach to life fundamentally shifts. Wow. From when you're just thinking, I want to leave an inheritance for my children.
Yes.
The moment you think, I want to build something that'll enable my children to leave an inheritance for their children, then your whole perspective of life begins to change.
Yes.
And I think that's something that I found really fascinating to say, okay, so maybe I'm struggling through life and trying to achieve financial security. But when I reach that point that you were talking about, where I go then, okay, now I've achieved this. Now it's not the end point at all.
No.
Now it is, have I trained my children? And if I haven't, what can I still do? I'm now 75 years old. My children are 30, whatever age they are. What input can I still do to help prepare them to leave it an inheritance for their children?
And that idea is something Jordan Peterson talks about when he talks about which is to me one of the classic, when I try and describe heaven and earth joining, the classic story in the Bible is when Jacob is running away from his brother because he's done some naughty stuff back home, and then he sleeps that night with the stone as his pillow, and then he has the dream of the ladder, Bethel, the house of God, and there's that ladder that connects the stone, earth, with the heaven, the throne, where at the top of the ladder it says that God is sitting. And what Jordan says, this is talking about this idea that's what that connection that we're trying to make is actually the fundamental kind of, well, I'm putting words, he doesn't say it like that, but that to me is the fundamental connection we're trying to make. It can be in relationship with your wife, your family, your friends, like we've got, but ultimately it's a relationship with the eternal and the spiritual. But that ladder, and again, I haven't looked at the Hebrew, but the idea of that is a staircase. And the reason is it's like a spiral, because you this is the idea of eternity. You're never there. You're delighted to come around, and when you come around on a spiral, you're closer to heaven than you were before.
Yes.
But you're not there again, and then you do the spiral again. And so it's this idea of a staircase that you actually, and it's quite tough for us to understand this, but in some ways it's comforting. You never get to the end.
So there's another thing that I thought about as I was thinking about all these things about feeling. That is another fundamental experience we're looking for, is that sense of growth.
Yes.
That sense
Absolutely.
of tomorrow is better than today
Absolutely.
in some way or another, and next week is better than, and sometimes once again, there's the long term and the short term where I go, well, tomorrow's going to be horrible.
Yes.
Because I'm going to be fasting, or I'm going to be like doing something that I don't enjoy. But it's part of getting around, because a week or 2 weeks or a month or a year from now, I'm going to be up.
I always say,
it's
like saying to somebody, I was speaking to my mother-in-law, and she gave us the love of the bush, and she's in her 80s, and we try and get her to come back, and we say, well, come, let's go for a little bush trip. She says, I've seen all of the animals. I've seen them all. And obviously she's speaking now from maybe a bit of a clouded view.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, well, that's true. I go to the bush every year, and I've seen every animal there is to see. Why would I want to see it again? And the reality is, because I know that every experience can hold something richer and at a higher level than I've ever, the more you know something and then you experience it again, the richer that experience is. And so that's that point. It's richer each time around. And that's an unbelievable thought to have. Even in marriage, you can have a time with your wife or something, and you think, wow, our relationship's so good. And you think, well, I haven't arrived, because there's another part of the staircase where it's going to even be better than this. And there used to be that saying, to your point, I thought of it as you were saying it, someone says, how are you doing? You say, well, not as I'm doing better than yesterday, but not as good as I'll do tomorrow. Yeah. And it's that idea that we've got to believe that we're just going on this improvement. There was a story, I don't remember her name, of this survivor of the Holocaust. She lives in Sea Point. She wrote a book, and she was featured at the Friendship Literary Festival. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. And she's just this amazing 90-year-old lady. She lives in Sea Point, and she didn't tell her story for like 35 years. And eventually they managed to get her story, and they wrote up her story, typical Holocaust concentration camp, but her survival journey, And there she is in front of this audience in the NGK in Franschhoek of 350 people. And she was seated most of the talk, because she's 90-something. And then she gets up at the end, and they say, thank you very much. And she just says, oh, I just want to say one more thing. All I want to say is onward and upward. And then she sits down. And I thought, there's no better term. Like, we've got to press onward, but we're not just pressing onward. Yeah. We're pressing onward
and upward.
Yeah. And we're going up that spiral staircase, and it's infinite wonder. And the interesting thing, just to close that thought, is when we've tried to get into the very essence of how we're created and how we're designed, we came across the DNA. And that's like our sort of fingerprint of God on us. And that DNA, at its very core, has that spiral shape. Yeah. If that isn't the message of the eternal growth that we have. So
absolutely. Yeah. I think, and that I think then sort of my last thought on that is, where does it go wrong when your onward and upward is defined in physical and material goals? And I'm not saying physical and material goals are wrong, but when those physical and material goals are not linked back to what really gives you experiences that are meaningful, then you think you've gone up.
Yes.
And you get to that point, you look around you and you go,
now you played
I'm still at the same level.
Now you've played into my segue. I told you I had a topic that I wanted to, because I think I have the answer for that. Because that is absolutely, and that's where I think you were saying, but people might say yes to all of this, and then they still say, but I'm not like. So I think that there's a lot of, so just recently I've been doing a lot of work with our church as well, just looking at, because I'm more into experience, just looking at some of the feasts that they had in Israel, which, we don't participate in as Christians often. We abstract a lot of stuff. And I understand, I don't have a debate about the law and grace and all that. But to me, I still think there's a lot of value. I mean, God created it like that. There was a lot of things they were being brought to their attention that maybe if we physically engaged in a bit more every now and again would be valuable for us. So the one that I've been looking at is one that you don't often think about. It's the Feast of Trumpets, which is going to happen in September and it's very significant still because the Feast of Trumpets is actually the beginning of the civil year for Israel, even from a secular point of view. So, I mean, if you know your biblical feast, you would say, well, the religious year actually begins with Passover, which is April. So they actually have 2 New Years. I didn't even understand this. And the New Year that they actually celebrate as their New Year, and they get 2 days public holiday in Israel, is this Feast of Trumpets.
Okay.
Now, why? Okay, well, I won't go into all the reasons why there's 2 different ones. Well, the one point is that this actually emerges out of the Bible because, the Bible says the Passover will be the first month because you were taken out of Egypt. And all the other feasts are then brought in from a religious calendar point of view.
Yeah.
But when they had to count the years for the Sabbath year and the Jubilee year, in other words, almost like the business years, they counted it from the first day of the 9th month, which is the trumpets. So it's true that it was like their civil years, the way they would have thought about how much more time have I got this property before I have to hand it back.
It's almost like our calendar year and financial year. Yeah.
Wow, I hadn't thought of that. That's a great way of actually looking. Exactly. But so what do? Why do they then have the trumpet at the beginning of the new year? And it is this idea, one of the big themes of the Feast of Trumpets is to awaken. To awaken. It must wake you up. You don't realize you've lost sight of the true, you need to recalibrate. You need to reorientate yourself. So we need, and this is the point why it's a segue, is what goes wrong is yes, we originally understand where north is, but then we understand that pragmatically there are a whole bunch of things that I need to do on the journey towards that. But then you just go slightly wrong from north. And you know what it's like if you just go 1 degree wrong initially from your direction. Before long, you are over here.
Yeah.
And then what happens is you hear the sound of the trumpet. And the sound of the trumpet's meant to awake you out of the stupor that you think is going in the right direction. Say, hey, you're not there. There's where you
recalibrate that.
Recalibrate your compass, and actually, you actually have gone up a bit, but you've gone up squiff.
Yeah.
And you need to get back onto the spiral staircase that's going the right way.
Because narrow is the way.
Yes. And just to finish that idea, so I've been looking at all of this idea behind the trumpets and all that. My niece was recently in Italy, and she was in these old towns that you're in, and she said, initially she was actually getting quite frustrated because in this old town, they don't just ring the church bells like once an hour. All right, like the one town, the church bells would ring like at least one ding every 15 minutes. And then on the hour, it would ring, whatever the time is, like we might hear, which we don't even hear anymore in most of our towns. And then she suddenly realized, actually, what's going on here? Why is the bell ringing? The church is ringing the bell to say, hey, remember, there's something more to life than what you're doing right now. And if every time I hear that bell, because I'm not going to hear it sometimes and I'm very busy, but every time in that 15 minute, I hear that bell, all it makes me do is say a 5-second prayer. Surely that's a good thing for me to be woken out of my stupor. So the church bells are the trumpets, in a sense, of the old age. We've got rid of those as well. And they were there to say, hang on a moment, are you actually still connected, or are you still calibrated to the right need and the right goal? Or have you started going in the wrong direction?
So I want to connect to that calibration. One of the things that really was meaningful for me as you know, a year and a half ago, I went through the worst burnout of my life.
Yes.
Took time out. And one of the scriptures, and this could sound very sort of cliche-ish, but Psalm 23, where it says, He restores my soul. Now in Afrikaans, it says, Hy herstel my siel. Now herstel means to reset.
Okay. To
set again. And I was thinking back of my manufacturing years, and we've got these things called PLCs that you have in a factory.
Yes.
And a PLC receives a bunch of inputs.
Yes.
And then based on those inputs, it controls the manufacturing process. Yes. And I began to realize that our heart is like a PLC. It receives a bunch of inputs, but when the calibration goes out, then the wrong inputs cause you to have the wrong outputs.
Yes.
So something happens, and the feeling or the experience or the meaning you assign to it is, oh, this happened, I should be anxious.
Yes.
and God says it's time to recalibrate.
Yes.
Whatever happens, anxiousness is
Yes.
never the right way to respond
Yes.
to it. Or this happens now, I should be greedy.
Yes.
God goes, no, calibration
Yes.
has gone out. Greed is not the right.
Yes.
I'm not saying you shouldn't desire.
Yes.
Not saying you shouldn't have a healthy fear of dangerous things, but your calibration has gone out. Take some time. And if you look at Psalm 23 and that process
It's about
by
that.
which God takes you through all the way till you're sitting in front of your enemy, but at the center of that psalm is the recalibration.
Yeah.
And then the other really interesting thing about that psalm is if you read it, it starts off talking about God. And when you go through the valley of the shadow of death, it changes to you. He goes from God, speaking to God in the third person, to speaking to God in the second person and addressing God directly.
Wow.
It's in the valley of the shadow of death
Yeah,
that it becomes personal.
Absolutely.
And that's just before that
Yeah.
valley where we get the reset to
Yes.
enable us to go through the valley.
That is amazing. And I think that calibration, so I mean, I had a friend that used to, made a fortune actually. All he sold was these, because with the shaking of machines, the vibration would offset these devices.
That's right.
And if they didn't have another piece of software that could measure that and therefore recalibrate them, eventually they would over time start cutting everything wrong, etc., which is your point.
Yes.
And so you've got to continuously, and you know, I think, you know, if we can bring this pragmatically back, maybe to sort of bring our thoughts to a conclusion, is that maybe to be pragmatic to somebody, to say, look, I think, and coming back to the feasts and coming back to, I think, a topic that you and I have spoken about, the importance of routine and habits as well. You know, many people write about this, is if you realize that losing your orientation, losing your calibration is a natural thing. It's probably this, this idea that entropy is built into the world.
Yeah.
Then you need to be back to a great word, which a lot of people use today, is the word intentional.
Yes.
And you need to say, well, I need to be intentional about building into my life collaboration events. So what are those? It could be a morning habit of prayer and Bible reading. It could be a weekly habit. Why do we, sometimes we can say if we church goers, it's pretty much the same thing every week. I'm going to, etc., etc. It's a recalibration
That's
event.
very good.
And then for me, why I like the idea of what I call Ha Sundays. And again, it's like we're funny as humans. If we make something too much, then maybe once a quarter there is something like a feast was.
Yes.
That and specifically it has an angle of resetting your collaboration, because it's not always, as we said, these things get a little bit complicated when you drop them down. It's not always just saying, oh, have I got God at the center? No, there's certain things you've got to explore within that idea. And so maybe what I'm saying is, because we know that we have to have the single thing that's guiding us, that's keeping the hierarchy in place, and we're working on all these other goals, but are they still aligned? We need to build into our living an intentionality that says, am I keeping the alignment right? Am I actually making sure that I'm still working with the plumb line here? Because if I've gone off just a bit, well, then the spiral staircase just starts going and it spirals its way all the way down. And then it's deep down there too. You can go down as deep almost as you can go up.
Yeah.
So that's where that dark depression that you spoke of comes in. So I think in some way we've kind of got to what you were thinking about.
We've done a full spiral, and then in the connection of all of that, remember to think about, how does it make me feel?
Absolutely.
How do I want to feel?
Yeah.
And how does it connect back to what I'm actually trying to
I think that's exactly what you started. You said, don't think if you just do something, or get to some position or get to some place that's going to deal with it. Have the intentionality to say, well, why was that? The picture, and then understand, what is that still
The
in need?
experience.
Have I gone up to the first principle of need? Have I
Yeah.
gone up to the first principle of feeling? And then say, have I tried to design my goals to achieve that? That's important. And then even if you've done that, you still got a good chance of going wrong if you don't recalibrate often, regularly. And that's again where I think relationship is important, because you're not doing this on your own. And if you've spoken to people like we've got a friendship, and other people, your family, etc., they become your calibration agents.
Absolutely.
That's why we go on this journey together, because they're saying, hang on a moment, you're going off course here, buddy. I can see it. I can see in the go and recalibrate.
Yeah, that is so good. Matt, thank you very much.
Buddy,
It has
always
once
been a
again
pleasure.
been a great conversation.